Good afternoon from London, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion convened by ONFIF and in partnership with the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance, discussing the role of green taxonomies in closing the data gap. So we'll be discussing the role of taxonomies in scaling up sustainable finance, how it can drive better quality data, and the data metrics that are required to achieve this. So my name's Emma McGarvey. I'm head of ONFIF's Sustainable Policy Institute, and I'm joined today by Sherry Madeira, who is chair of FOSDA, or the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance, and also Senior Vice President at MasterCard. Sean Kidney, who is co-founder and CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, and is also co-chair of FOSDA's Mapping Taxonomies to Data Workstream initiative as well. And also Elia Triple, who is Policy Analyst of Green Finance and Investment at the OECD, and Elise et al., who is Head of EU Policy and the UN Support Principle for Responsible Investment. And apologies, we will not be joined today by Elia Triple. She's unfortunately ill, but we have Elise here with us. So. Welcome, thank you for joining us today. And a reminder to our audience to please do put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will put them to our panelists. So we'll jump straight in with a question, and then we'll allow our panelists to briefly introduce ourselves when they answer that question. My first question will be, what role will taxonomies play in scaling up and moving transition finance and transition plans? And Elise, maybe I can go to you first.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Emma, for the question. Thanks for the invitation as well. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Well, we believe that taxonomies can really play a crucial role in scaling up global sustainable funding overall. I mean, there are a lot of money which is needed to finance sustainable objectives. And we think that taxonomies can really help investors to move away from emitting sectors specifically. They are tools which have been designed for sustainability investment purposes, and they respond to three main functionalities. Taxonomies are designed as an assessment tool. They really are here to help investors understand whether an economic activity is environmentally sustainable. That's to say whether their investment can really meet robust environmental standards and whether those investments are consistent with high-level climate commitments, such as the Paris Agreement. So they are really helpful to assess the sustainability of current portfolio, for instance. They are also a very important navigation tool for investors. They can really help them to navigate the transition to a low carbon economy, because taxonomy set up a common language between investors, between issuers, between project promoters, savers, policymakers. And it's essential to have this common understanding to make sure that we can plan and scale up investments in the relevant sustainable activities. So it's a tool really to help design a future trajectory. It's a tool to help setting objectives and targets for a transition to a low carbon economy. And finally, it's also a very important communication tool if it's science-based. It really can provide clarity to investors and the overall investment community on what is green or sustainable, and under which specific conditions the activities are considered as sustainable. It's a tool then to help limit greenwashing for companies, for end investors, for savers. It's very crucial that we develop those tools to have based on transparency. I think it's very important that taxonomies are scientifically robust. And that the criteria are very credible for the framework, because it can really provide further clarity on how to align the different holdings with the EU objectives, for instance, on the EU taxonomy. And it's really going to help investors to report back to clients, specifically on the proportion of their portfolio that can be seen as green. So overall, we at the PRI really believe those tools are very important for investors to help them allocate capital towards sustainable activities, but also to have more discussion and dialogue with the investees company and try to help them define new scenarios and define where they should have R&D and so on for transition planning as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And indeed, I think we'll go a little bit deeper into kind of what this means for funding and asset allocation, and also the criteria for sustainable products in a minute. But Sherry, maybe I'll go over to you for brief introductions, and also what you think the role taxonomies will play in scaling up and moving transition finance, and hopefully helping develop transition plans for the financial sector as well.
Great. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, OMFIF, for being such a great partner to FOSDA, and for also explaining why we're calling it FOSDA as opposed to the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance, which is a bit of a mouthful. I think Elise really set the stall out, about how taxonomies can really shape and shift and make sure that capital is being allocated or encouraged to be allocated to a very clear, sustainable outcome. But I will say this, taxonomies are really only as good as the data that goes into them, in terms of being able to sort of, harness sort of a complete set of understanding, so that investors, so that regulators, so that those that are across the ecosystem are able to really use them to their full extent. And there are, remember, we're talking about taxonomies like they're some sort of unified whole. That certainly is not the case. FOSDA published, late last year, and this has been a moving target as well, an infographic about taxomania, because there's quite a lot of them out there. And certainly I'm sure that we'll hear from Sean about some more deep dives on what that really means. But, it's added to that buffet of language: standards, frameworks, principles, taxonomies. And my view is that we really need to also focus on the building blocks that go into those systems, and make sure that the data itself is really robust, and that as we're building up into using these tools, and I think Elise used that word, which is exactly right, that actually we're using these tools in order to make sure that we're really aware of where capital is going, and that we're really backing where it is to be more sustainable, and trying to make sure that we're mitigating the risks of greenwashing. However, if we're not getting our data sets accurate enough, we can inadvertently be adding risk into that system that we're trying to mitigate. So I think that's one caution that's out there. I also wanted to make the comment that if we're talking about taxonomies, the multiple taxonomies and how they might map together, that there is a certain political layer that goes on with that taxonomy. So, often we refer back to the EU taxonomy, but I know certainly some of this panel have had significant scars on trying to match up the EU taxonomy with, for example, the Chinese taxonomy, which came first. It came before the EU one. And in trying to max those two together, there's a great piece of work that's called Common Ground Taxonomy, looking at how that fits. And frankly, it's not an exact match. If you can imagine, there are 40 others that are being developed out there as well, trying to really try and harness the power of them by understanding which data sets are common, which areas are really sort of reaching across, can help especially multinational investors be able to use these things with real confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the common ground taxonomy, how we can try and kind of find a common language, is something we'll discuss later, and it's certainly something that we're seeing a lot in our conversations at OMFIF, and the kind of challenges that the financial sector are grappling with all these different taxonomies, and the power that data can have. I think to help that is definitely something, again, we can touch upon later. But Sean, maybe I'll go over to you for quick introductory remarks, and the role that you think taxonomies can play in helping to drive this transition.
Emma, I'm a little biased. What can I say? Mea culpa. In 2012, we launched the first taxonomy, the climate bonds taxonomy, which was a guidance to drive the green bond market, which at that stage was about $60 billion, $70 billion. Now, in 2022, we've got $1.8 trillion outstanding. The idea of creating guide rails to simplify understanding of what qualifies worked very well in the green market. And we managed to get a couple of governments to think this was a good idea to amplify investments in these areas that were a high priority for those markets. First was China. I was a member of the People's Bank of China Green Finance Task Force in 2014, an eon ago, and they introduced what they called a green projects catalog. which Sherry was referring to. I'm going to say it was done in an incredible hurry. The report wasn't yet finished, which was launched in March of 2015 finally. The PBOC said, yes, let's do it. And they had a taxonomy ready by the 1st of January before the report was finished. It was very much sticky tape and plaster. And that showed in a way. It took them till last year, in fact, finally, in April of last year, the day before the Biden Climate Summit, very deliberately so, that they launched their updated taxonomy, which brought them more into line with the discussions we've been having in Europe. And that convergence, in other words, has become a feature of the last couple of years. The Common Ground taxonomy, which we've been working on behalf of the European Commission and the People's Bank of China, is the latest iteration of that convergence direction that's going on. We then, in 2016, the high-level expert group for sustainable finance for the EU that I was a member of recommended a taxonomy, and to my shock, the Commission said, yes, let's do it. Really blew me away. And it's a kind of Brexit dividend. It seems clear that if Britain had still been in the European Commission, Jonathan Hill, the Commissioner, would have vetoed this idea. For those of you in London, you might say, yes, that's right, we should have stayed there. Should we kill this idea? But I'm going to say it didn't work out that way. The Commission took it, and it's been a win. It's been an incredible win. Now, I need to say, yesterday I did a webinar with two leading MEPs, new members of the European Parliament on this, Paul Tang and Sirpa Petikainen, who acknowledged it's a work site, it's a building site. The taxonomy is a work in progress, which is why FOSTA is so important, right? Because it's a way of contributing to the kinds of data resources that will make the taxonomy work for corporations and out there. But the win is we now have a clear green corner. We now have a common language. And while we've got all these taxonomies mushrooming around the world, and I will admit we're working in a large number of them, we have a common framework, and you will see much more in common than is different. That's the key point. It looks like it's a different kind, a 1,000 flowers, different colors, but they are 1,000 flowers. And there is a significant commonality between all of them, especially in key areas like, what kind of industrial investments count, or energy investments count. Even the Russian taxonomy, lost a bit because of the war, which was passed by the Duma last September, is actually largely a copy of the European taxonomy with some Russian flourishes, including on gas, interestingly enough. So we can't have a single taxonomy because we don't have a single government in the world at this stage. We are necessarily going to have different sorts of taxonomies, but at least we can have broad convergence. Now, we need to do a bit more work on convergence going forward. This is the building side aspect. We also need to do a bit more work on making sure the European taxonomy is usable. We've taken some bureaucratic turns here and there. We've put in requirements for data where data doesn't exist, which is a bit of a mess that we're trying to fix in Europe at the moment. And you will see some usability guidance coming out for the European taxonomy later this year, which will hopefully improve a few of these things. Some of these solutions, some of these problems we're having can be solved by collecting, publishing, and making available data. And that's what FOSTA is looking at doing. This is, again, why it's so important. We have an amazing group of organizations involved in FOSTA. Sherry can go into the details, but it includes Bloomberg, Refinitiv, LACG, S&P, and so on and so on. So the big data, the heavy iron data providers are there. We haven't got Xinhua yet. We've got to get Xinhua, Sherry, from China. But we're doing quite well. And the job now is to provide data. Now I'm going to say, before taxonomy, the problem we tried to solve in the green bond market taxonomy was everyone had their own data filters, a bit like still exists in ESG. This is why we've had the rage of DWS, not necessarily because DWS were misleading the market, I'm going to say, but because they had a black box approach to ESG, which was out of kilter with other people's black box approaches. There were 1,001 different languages. It was a bit like Australia, where there are more languages in Australia than you can poke a stick at around the world, because every different community operated differently. In the green bond market, as Elise was reminding us, common language has been the key. And we're achieving that in Europe. We're cutting through the different kind of approaches to defining what is green through this process. We've at least now understand there is an edge, a boundary to the green area. or having a lot of arguments about who is green. But this is the win we've had. This extraordinary win is everyone's now saying, hang on, I'm green too. Wait for me. They're arguing to be part of the green paddock. No longer are they arguing, oh, this green stuff, that's rubbish, which we used to hear all the time. And so it's a symptom of success that everyone wants to be a part of this now. And we are having boundary issues, and we've got a process to deal with those boundary issues. And we've managed to establish some core principles, science-based, Paris Agreement aligned, etc. This is not the case 2 years ago, folks. This is new. This is a big win. Mm-hmm. But of course, the problem is we've still got to find data in a lot of areas. So we've got to do work to make sure the building site can be, well, we can actually get to a building we can live in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll go on to the data question, and we've had a really good question from an unfortunately anonymous attendee, but we will come to this. Richard Marshall has another question as we kind of naturally gone on to this discussion of varying taxonomies and how we can deal with that. Richard's second question is, why are these taxonomies in the realms of government? Why can't the investment market not bypass politicians and create a single global market? Surely that would make their lives simpler. Sean, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Elise, I'll come to you.
Richard, what a great idea. It's fantastic. But can you tell us what sort of structure we can do here and how we're going to do this? I mean, just give me a path. And I'm going to say the UN doesn't exactly work really well as a global standard, unfortunately, because of the governance structure we've designed, which is fundamentally designed to be run by the Security Council, which is outdated because it doesn't represent all the proper economic forces of the world anymore. Well, put it this way, there isn't a home. There isn't a logical structure. I wish there was. And I do think the way we'll evolve, especially given climate change forces us to work globally on responses, we'll probably get there. So in the meantime, we're going to have to make do with a federated approach, which is the way we're working in Europe. This is why Europe and developing common rules in Europe is such a test for the planet. If we can get agreement amongst 27 countries, well, why would you bother trying anything else? So hey, let's just go with it. This is the normalizing power of Europe by setting and creating standards. And this is exactly what's happening, by the way. The taxonomies in the way around the world are referencing the European taxonomy. It's not perfect yet. We've got to sort out a few problems. If we can sort those out properly in Europe, we will effectively get the normalizing power, giving us a global approach. But in the meantime, it's quite hard because we don't have my friend Steve Waygood at Aviva keeps calling for a global chief investment officer. It'd be great, wouldn't it? But I'm not quite sure who's in a position to create that. The G20 is not quite that organized yet. Until that time, the path we're taking now is the way we're going to have to do it.
Yeah. Elise, maybe I can go to you then. Do you have there's a lot here, but do you have a response to something
yes.
Sean had said and Richard's
sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm completely in line with what Sean said. I mean, there is a lot of ongoing discussion, at G7, G20, and so the question here is more, for now, the question of the convergence of the different taxonomy framework that we are seeing popping out in every jurisdiction. I think that's a key issue as we move forward. As for now, we don't have like a sufficiently strong international governance to, agree on like a global taxonomy. We have the Paris Agreement, which I think should be the reference for all the taxonomies being developed around the world. The PRI has actually recently published a couple of weeks ago, together with the World Bank, an implementation guide for taxonomies. And the guide outlines already what are the key building blocks that sustainable taxonomy needs to have in order to adhere to some of the global framework and to ensure that there is this global harmonization across the different taxonomies that we are seeing being developed. And so the reports especially identify like 4 common features that taxonomy should have so that we can help create this convergence. They need to have like similar objectives. Although they can adapt in some specific to some specific national context, because you need to take into consideration the like development capacities of each country and their like specific dependency on some energies and so on. But they should have like a similar objective, and I think making the link here with the Paris Agreement is very crucial. Secondly, we need to have a same and easy comparable industry classification system that defines those economic activities that will really make it easier, the life easier for investors that have to use different frameworks in their global investments. Thirdly, they should have like a similar approach when it comes to the design of the technical screening criteria and the thresholds, based as much as possible on science-based, but also on very transparent criteria. There is this, like the EU taxonomy has taken a very stringent approach with identifying like the significant contribution and having the do not significantly harm criteria as well, but like trying to make sure that other taxonomies also use those concepts, I think are important to have the convergence of in terms of design of those policy frameworks. And finally, they also need to have like consistent metrics and calculation methodology, because this is extremely complex for investors, when you have to do all the screening and get the data, and if you have like a lot of divergence in terms of the very technical criteria you use to qualify an economic activity as sustainable, it can create real headaches for like investors and for like data providers that are helping investors to get those data. So I think trying to have this building block approach, as the other panelists also mentioned, is going to be very crucial for the overall convergence of the taxonomies, as we for now don't have an international governance that really help us to have like a global taxonomy at the international level.
Mm. And so Elise, what kind of impact has the development of taxonomies had so far in terms of kind of growing sustainable funding, asset allocation towards green investment, and also kind of green bond issuance? And can you give us a bit of an indication of kind of what the key criteria are for sustainable products? If you want to talk about the EU taxonomy, because that makes sense, fine. But if you can talk a bit broader, then also very easy.
Well, I'm head of EU policy, so I'm most familiar with the EU taxonomy. I must say I'm not like an expert on all the other taxonomy developments, but happy to talk about the specificities of the EU taxonomy if this is helpful. So I mean, the EU taxonomy in my view is quite unique, and to me the most sophisticated framework so far compared to other taxonomy under development around the world. It's very much because of its nature. I mean, it has like three key things you can stress, which make it quite unique. First, it's very comprehensive. The EU has decided to identify 6 environmental objectives. It has implemented that do not significantly harm principle to other environmental objectives, which is a very crucial concept because it makes it a very stringent classification tool. There is a significant contribution thresholds as well. So it has a combination of both looking at positive and negative outcomes of a given activity. So it makes it quite unique in that sense. Secondly, it's also been made very central in the entire EU sustainable finance framework. It's been defined by legislation. It's been placed at the center of the EU policy framework for sustainable finance. It's linked to the EU climate ambition to become climate neutral by 2050. So it's very prominent in the entire architecture of the sustainable finance policies being developed within the EU. And the most important thing, I think, is that it comes with very clear disclosure requirements to really encourage the uptake of taxonomy and to also ensure availability of data. There is a very clear disclosure framework for taxonomy related information, which is going to mandate both companies under the NFRD and CSRD now, and also for investors under SFDR to disclose very precisely their taxonomy figures. That's quite unique in my view in terms of the requirements and the transparency requirements which are imposed onto investors especially.
Yeah. Sherry, do you have anything to add to this and to kind of what Sean started talking about before we moved on to development of green products and things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to sort of call out, a harmonization. That would be great. And why don't we just get on with it? Why don't we, lead from the private sector? The reality is actually that this is still such a journey. I mean, if we think about CDPs have been around for 20 years, Carbon Disclosure Project, now CDP, and only 1% of CDP reporting companies reported all 24 of the key indicators. I find that actually something really for us to think about because that is a private sector voluntary submission into sort of reporting data in this very specific sector of sustainability, carbon, very, very at the forefront there. And if that's been going for 20 years, it kind of gives us an indication that this isn't voluntarily happening, and that actually having some sort of frameworks, guiding principles, et cetera, which go from voluntary to mandatory. We've already seen that with the TCFD. That actually is part of the framework of building up where we need to go. So I think that there is that piece to remember. And as well, if we're thinking about taxonomies, that's a derivative, right? So as I said at the beginning, that's a derivative of perhaps some of those basic data sets that need to be pulled together for a use case. So in the taxonomy case, is something green by that definition or not? So that's the use case for the data that's coming out. And as Sean and Elise and we've all said, the data isn't complete now. That doesn't mean that we should stop. Doesn't mean it's the fault of the data that we're not moving forward, but we're on a journey and we need to push that forward. And now we're not even getting harmonization completely at the standards and disclosure of the data level. The ISSB, EFRAG from a EU perspective, working on a roadmap, the SEC, pushing forward. From a FOSDA perspective, all these things are good, right? It's good to get them out there in terms of thinking about disclosure, pushing forward on making sure that sort of there's at least a regional alignment to what should be disclosed in order to be able to both comply to the regulations, but also to use, to be active enablers of sustainable finance. But I bring this up because a harmonization, in my own personal opinion, is a long way off. And actually what we really need to do is to be able to create interoperability from the very base case. So those building blocks of data, how can they be multiply used? How is it that some of those data pieces are absolutely critical and are used in global taxonomies, in global frameworks, in global regulatory, and in active management? And let's make sure that the data density in those building blocks are absolutely accurate, that the data density of the raw data in those building blocks is really there for us to use, so that we really try and make sure that the risk of the 3 E's don't get built in. And in my world, those 3 E's are estimation, extrapolation, and errors. And if we can start getting those really deep, dense data pots in what is being multiply used, those frameworks and the natural harmonization that will come and be demanded of by the market, especially multinationals, then actually we've got, we're moving as quickly on that journey, hopefully accelerating that in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that ties me into my next question. But Shauna, I saw you shaking your head. Is there anything, or nodding your head, I should say? Is there anything you would like to add to that?
That's why Sherry is our leader. Because she presents this so well. She's absolutely dead right. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think Richard Marshall was asking, just to respond to what Sherry is responding to, why does the private sector take the lead? It is the climate bonds taxonomy, for example, is backed by investors and the like around the world, and it works. But I'm going to say there is nothing so powerful as getting a regulator in a major economy to suddenly say, guys, here's a new rule set. Honestly, it beats anything the private sector can do. Now, I'm not talking about Kenya or Myanmar or Philippines. I'm talking about China and Europe, maybe next year the US, and that's what we've got here. And so the number of countries and the number of investors, the number of issuers that are now thinking taxonomy is directly a result of China, but more importantly, as a bigger international economy in terms of application of funds around the world, Europe's engagement with this idea, okay, we need some guidance here. And it's taken off, it's gone crazy. We do need to make interoperability work. I mean, we're working on that at client bonds this year, but it will be part of the FOSTA work stream, etc. But we're bedding down taxonomies all around the world. We published Singapore's just recently as the draft consultation. We're starting work on Chile's next month, etc. So there's a lot of work. Again, broadly in the same direction with some differences. And then you will start seeing it towards the end of this year, tools for interoperability start appearing. Already some of the artificial intelligence companies that are saying, plug your data in here and we'll show you how you align to taxonomy, which is, there's a few companies in Europe doing that, are now looking to how they can do that across different country economies as well. These tools will become available. So like I said, it's a building site, but at least now we've got a proper argument, a proper discussion, proper boundary setting about what is Paris Agreement consistent. And that was not the case 2 years ago, and I can give you some juicy stories, war stories if you like about that, but I'll hold that back for a minute.
Keep us waiting. So Sherry, you kind of talked about the disclosure expectations and the fact that kind of financial institutions are still not disclosing at a good enough level. Obviously, one of the things that we're constantly hearing is that in order to disclose, issue green products, better data is required. And obviously you mentioned kind of getting stronger data density, which is part of that. So how can we kind of get that better data quality and comparability, and what role do you think taxonomies can play in kind of driving that better data?
Yeah, I mean, I think taxonomies are a really sort of focal point of trying to understand how it is that you can make sure you're mapping your data directly into the taxonomies. And in terms of data density, I think part of this is one of the really core reasons where FOSDA can play a unique role, which is that our members, as Sean mentioned, are experts like Sean, like the NGOs out there like the CBP, but it's also the data vendors in the marketplace who are trying to deliver the best quality data to their client base across financial institutions and regulatory community as well. And if they start kind of understanding where those data sets are most needed, they can play a hugely critical role in moving them forward. Where FOSDA plays a role is we're able also to give some comfort to both the institutions and the financial ecosystem and the regulators to say, actually, these data sets do exist. And there is density, or this is the section of the density that's strongest, either by industry, by country. Of course, when you have data, you're able to cut it and interrogate it. And having a industry-wide platform of members that are contributing to that, you have a much better feeling for where that data is and how it, and if it exists. You also have the watchword that can come out there, which is that actually the data, the raw data that's being inputted is a lower percentage in certain areas. And that, I think, is a really important thing for us as a global community to be aware of, so that we can make sure that we're regulating for today and tomorrow, and that if we're starting to think that there isn't the sort of density that is needed in those data sets that are fundamental to the taxonomies that are being put out there into the marketplace, we should think about how we fix that. And we should be thinking, and we should be talking quite actively about which regions, which industries, et cetera, might need a little bit more encouragement, or understand how we incentivize that, because it's so fundamentally important to the marketplaces. And one thing, we've been talking very, very positively about taxonomies, but I do have a worry. And one of the worries is that actually, as you hear perhaps some of the legal community, some of the advisory community coming into play and giving some advice to corporates and to financial for asset managers, et cetera, is, there is a lot of risk in being able to claim that you are green according to taxonomies or according to whichever sort of frameworks. And that's because potentially the data isn't exactly as you expect. And of course, we are seeing these greenwashing pushbacks that are coming up into the marketplace. And there is risk that's in there. What I think we need to sort of figure out is, how is it that we make sure that actually all this fantastic work that's been going on, all the huge expert thought that goes into developing a taxonomy and what data is needed for that taxonomy is going to be used. And that actually the risk potentially out there isn't something that becomes so large that actually we don't have anyone using the taxonomy markers. And we're not saying, having companies and financial institutions going out there saying, I am green, because of the fear of something small and inside the markers that they don't intend to be going against, but because of the lack of clarity, it's still a bit of a risk for them. I think that Sean's point about talking about how it is to implement, how it is, we can create guidance on what good looks like, how to utilize, And then from a positive perspective, how it is you can make sure that that data is available. I think that all of that has to sing together. Otherwise, I fear that potentially at the end of this, we're not going to have the same buffet of green options that are qualified as we would really like.
Yeah. Elise, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what's been said. I mean, it's still a work in progress regarding data. We have recently published another report with what we call the Taxonomy Practitioners Group at the PRI. So it's like signatories that have been testing the taxonomy, before it was even put out there. And we have released recently like an updated report. And someone was actually saying that the taxonomy was like the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. It's never going to be completely finalized. The data is never going to be completely perfect. But this should not hold us back from starting to work on it and to go ahead, because investors through like the different case studies that we've published have really shown that we can already use the taxonomy in a very meaningful way. There are for sure issues related to data when it comes first to data availability. If I take here the example of the EU, of course, like for now, like non-financial undertakings are only required to disclose taxonomy eligibility, not the full alignment. So the data is still, to be completely made available and required. The data required to calculate the KPIs related to the taxonomy, so against revenue, CapEx, OpEx, is not always available yet. Most of the disclosure that the interviewees we had engagements with said that the disclosure for now is mainly on revenue and not sufficiently on CapEx and OpEx. So that's still to be improved. And also the data is limited and not that much available for non-EU companies and also for SMEs. So that also brings other question. In terms of the granularity of the data, they highlight that the revenue figures, when they are available, they are not segmented by activity type. So that creates, they are aggregated at the sector level or just at the level of the company. So it can be challenging for investors when they want to have like more detailed analysis at the portfolio level, at the activity level. And then there is this entire debate about the consistency of the data. It has to be like, match the taxonomy classification. The data is sometimes not sufficiently relevant or reliable. There is an ongoing debate on the EU whether you can use estimates, how you do that for non-EU companies. And there is ongoing work being done by the Platform on Sustainable Finance, the usability and data subgroup with the European regulator that are trying to solve those problems. But this being said, I mean, I really think that it's just a question of time. We're still like in the EU in this pilot phase, and there are like different frameworks and regulations that are coming in that are really going to ease the data flow overall. So we just need to give a bit of time there, and the data is going to be made available. I think for now, in the meantime, investors already do respond to, and have data available. Again, in our report, we identify some advanced practices that of an example of how investors deal with this lack of data. So for now, they, for instance, conduct due diligence on data provider assessment to use the different data sets that are made available by service providers. And they also conduct taxonomy-focused stewardship. So like they have more and more direct dialogue with the investees to try to get the data directly from them. And that's a way, of course, to improve the data flow. Looking forward, I mean, we really expect that data availability will just improve over time, and that as the framework matures, we'll have more data available for investors, from companies especially.
Mm-hmm. Sherry, could you add to this in terms of the data sets that are required that we need for this? And also we've had a question for kind of what are the most glaring data gaps that you're seeing? I'm wondering if you could also touch upon that too.
Yeah, I mean, I was with some fellow data geeks in Brussels last week, and actually, the challenge is, which data sets are those top 20, top 50, and of course, the true geeks out there kind of threw their hands in the air and said, no, absolutely, we need at least 150, unique data sets for one element of the taxonomy alone. So, I have to sort of, give my answer with that grain of salt, which is, absolutely sort of getting sort of even more granular, which is a word that Elise used, which I really think is important for us to get into, has got sort of, we do need to do this mapping, and it hasn't been completely done because, of course, the taxonomies are continuing to move and shift, and we need to make sure that is in line. However, I mean, if you think about the big data sets, greenhouse gas emissions or emissions overall, and even that starts breaking down. If we're talking about carbon emissions, are we talking about methane? And of course, we saw out of COP26 that there was a huge methane pledge for multiple countries that signed up for it back in last year. So how is it that that's starting to be measured? And again, sort of how is that sort of being pulled out of the disclosure statements from a corporate versus what has been signed up to at the country level? Different scopes of emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, we all kind of have heard that, essentially sort of how it is that's broken down are various different data sets that also roll up into some of those bigger sort of carbon questions. But water usage, water is another big portion of that climate, that C or that E section of ESG. But again, of course, we're talking about E, S, and G, and it depends, on where your taxonomy is going and how much of it is also sort of starting to err into the world of social. I think, Elise, you mentioned the concept of do no harm, and where that starts directionally going towards a biodiversity or nature positive way of looking at things. So again, sort of when we're thinking about taxonomies, we've got today, and we're also starting to think about what data are we going to need for tomorrow. And that includes, a variety of different impacts on the environment, around some of the physical environment that a company is inhabiting, where sort of some of those impacts on the physical environment around them are as well. So you've got that, and you've also got your social issues. So, do you have policies in certain areas in terms of diversity, inclusion, et cetera? How is it that you are looking at your own governance as a company fits into that G section? So, the data points are enormous, and some of them are not immediately thought of as being core to climate. But when you really break down where the taxonomies are going and where some of the other regulation is going, actually, they're very contributive to be able to be meaningful in terms of where it is that we're trying to get to. So hopefully, that's a bit helpful about sort of what types of data sets. Emma, you asked me something else.
About kind of what glaring gaps and holes that you're currently seeing. That was a question from the audience.
Yeah, so I hate being, sort of front running any of my work streams, but you can sort of see last year that there were a couple of publications that are open on our website. Please do go and download anything that's there. We've just released our annual report as well, which directionally gives you a few more links to other reports as well. One of the things that we did call out quite clearly was looking at biodiversity as a big whole. Some of that is not able to be disclosed. So when we're talking about disclosure frameworks, that doesn't completely embrace everything you might need for biodiversity and understanding there. That goes into geospatial, starts thinking about sort of macro environmental data as well that's needed in order to be able to make that information decision useful for investors. So again, that whole patch and he's working on, and we're really delighted at FOSDA that we're working closely with the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, to work alongside as they're suggesting the principles, making sure that we're sharing what data is available, isn't available, what can be used as proxies, how it is we start building that up together. So that's one whole. I also think that there's a huge amount of granularity that's missing on the S element of ESG as well. Often we're taking on data points that talk, and this actually goes over into the climate side as well. Do you have a policy, Mr. Company or Mrs. Company, on social mobility, on gender diversity, on workforce, et cetera? And the answer is yes or no. And that's the data point. Yes or no. I have a policy or I don't have a policy. So again, the granular nature of that, I think we see as being something that needs improvement, because otherwise, having the policy itself may not be exactly what the investor is looking to do. So those are a couple of examples.
But I've got to be careful here. All this stuff isn't necessarily in taxonomy, right? The taxonomy is meant to be. So there's an issue of data points that investors are now finding interesting. in terms of predictive capacity. And then there's what we're saying in taxonomy are minimum requirements to qualify for a universe, which is different. And it's really important that taxonomy ends up being simple and easy to use. Otherwise, we have no chance. And I'm going to say, my friend Satoshi Ikeda at the Japan, the regulator in Japan, who's the chief sustainable finance officer, once sat next to me on an OECD platform and said, the taxonomy is the Darth Vader of climate science. And I can see why, when you're in the middle of designing it, and I have a lot of sympathy for the position, is it looks messy and it looks complicated and it looks like a pain in the ass. But the truth is, if we were designing an electric car, it'd be the same thing too. The design, all those wires under the hood, complicado. The art of this and the art of taxonomy, if we think it's working, is that once it's there, you can get in, press a button and drive. That's what we need to be able to do as drivers. And so the message I take to governments around the world and to regulators is that when we look at the usability issues of taxonomy, it has to actually be usable and applicable. We've got to be careful in a way of requiring too many data points. That would be a mistake. We need to simplify. Now, we need to get our ambition right. So when I say simple, I'm not saying, oh, let's just allow a lot of gas in. We have to have boundaries in here. Market value is supported by strong boundaries. And the boundaries here need to be Paris Agreement aligned. One of the people in the quick Q&A asked about changes in science. It's true that in the last 5 years, we've learned a lot about leakage factors in the industry. It's now very clear in net zero that new gas, new fossil fuel extraction and energy generation cannot qualify under the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree targets, but it is evolving science. We will need to update our criteria as that evolves. That's understandable. Doesn't mean, but we've got to be careful of a few rules in finance. Retrospective changes don't work right. We've got to apply rule sets to the forward. We've got to keep it simple. We evolve the science, we look at it, we put out rule sets which people can understand. And if we're not making it understandable, we are failing. And I'm saying this in Europe now, we haven't got this sorted out yet. We are still in the process of developing, making it understandable, and we'll be publishing from the EU platform a usability report after the summer to try and improve all of this and provide guidance around this. So it is a work in progress, but it's a necessary work in progress, because if you think about the counterfactual, we have failed for the last 30 years to drive our economies, drive our societies in the right direction to avoid catastrophe. The IPCC is telling us we are really failing. We've got to get our emissions down 50% globally by 2030 to have a chance, even a chance of avoiding catastrophic outcomes. So it's in that context that it becomes important for us to have a go at new solutions and develop clear guidelines, what not to do by implication and what to do. Think of this very simply and how it should work for the user. It's a shopping list for the future. This is what we're doing here. We're creating a shopping list for the future. And if you can't read it like that when you go into a supermarket, then we're not getting it right. Please, everyone, push back, argue, go to the regulators and say, hang on, this has become too complicated. Make it simple for me. I'm not arguing with what we need to do. I'm arguing with how you make it useful for me. And that is the work in progress. That's the building site aspect of it. There are some boundary issues. You know, we now have a global conversation on transitions. And I'm going to point to Satoshi's colleagues at METI in Japan who are leading this discussion on what transitions, industrial transitions need to look like. Which is exactly what we've got to tackle, taking high carbon and shifting it to low carbon. In other words, it's not recognizing what qualifies now, it's recognizing plans to change that are consistent with the Paris Agreement and how we tackle that. There are still some arguments in there. I would probably have an argument with some of the Japanese multinationals about gas. I would say, hang on, the science doesn't work anymore. But the point is we're now having the arguments. And once we have the clear rules, as is now becoming normal around the world, we can now blanket incentives. We will tilt the playing field to green, which is what we're seeing. We're already seeing central banks around the world bring in tilting mechanisms, cheaper capital in China, for example, guarantee instruments that G7 countries are rolling out for other countries, all tied to the same underlying infrastructure, which is taxonomy. And that helps us build momentum across our economy for change. That's the prize, if you like, for this process. It's the prize, and it's within grasp.
Yeah, Sherry, Elise, do you have a response to that?
Just a comment as to, explaining why, Sean is leading our taxonomy work, because I think everybody across this ecosystem would say simple, good, and actually, the easier it is to be able to understand sort of how disclosure pieces map right up into something that's going to be as simple to be able to execute. I mean, that's exactly where we're going. Well said.
Elise, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I really agree. I mean, the question of, being consistent with the science, with the Paris Agreement is crucial. There are like other, when it comes to the, discussion and debate about specific technology, gas and so on. There is the example, for instance, of the UK taxonomy, which is being developed at the moment. So, for instance, we recently signed a joint letter with the UK CIF and IGCC to call up the UK Prime Minister not to include natural gas activities within the scope of its green taxonomy, because we think it's misleading and confusing for investors, especially. So, I think it's very important. And Sean mentioned the different IEA reports and so on. I mean, it's quite clear now that there's no carbon budget left for new investment in gas. So that should be made it clear if we want to have a real sustainable taxonomies. I think we need to agree on what are those future-proof technologies and the shopping list for the future that Sean mentioned. Again, I think it's how taxonomy should be understood and framed for investors. This doesn't mean that we don't need. I mean, we need the different tools to finance the transition. It's not going to stop those economic activities to receive funding in the meantime. It's about the how we transition, but we need to be very clear about what is future proofed and aligned with the Paris Agreement to really allow that transition. Otherwise, we're not going to get there, and we're not going to meet our carbon neutrality targets.
Yeah. We've had a question about corporate goals, and indeed kind of one of the things that we see and the gaps that we're kind of identifying is between the corporates and the financial sector, especially when it comes to disclosure and kind of getting that data. So one of the things that I'd love to touch upon is kind of how we can help kind of build that bridge, get that data from the corporates, get that disclosure from the corporates, helping the financial sector, and the role that taxonomies could potentially play in that. So at least maybe I can go to you first, and also just to touch upon the attendees' question, how we can kind of reward ambitious corporate goals, and should ESG and green investors kind of push more investment to those corporates that are kind of doing the right things and are kind of moving in that right direction.
Well, I mentioned that I guess dialogue with investors is quite key to get the data. In the meantime, especially in Europe now, we have the CSRD. We are going to have the European Single Access Points as well, which is going to help to have more data available. And the disclosure obligations are phased in and entering into force. So this is going to really, we're waiting for those to be implemented to have more data. So I think as I said, the data flow is going to start being more productive. And yeah, in the meantime, I think we already see, investors having discussion about transition plans from the companies and how this has to be mapped up to the taxonomies, for instance. So I think that already provides a framework for identifying transition pathways for the relevant different companies and how the taxonomy can help define the different mechanisms that need to be implemented, what it means for the business model of the company, what it means in terms of R&D. So those conversations, I think, are already starting to happen now.
Yeah, Sean, do you have anything to add to this?
On this question, I'm going to step back because this is where Sherry and Elise have more practical comments to make. And let's face it, I've spoken enough as this.
Sherry, do you? Not at all. Sherry, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think it's about sort of, let's kick it up a notch. It's about access to capital ultimately, right? And it's about channeling capital to sustainable net positive. We've just had such a robust view globally that this is a global priority. It has to be. And so I think that, having these taxonomies and seeing how you can match up, even if you're not a listed company, when you're a smaller company and you're starting to think about where you're going to get your access to capital in the future, Sean's point about a shopping list for the future. Well, if you're looking at how it is that you're going to be accessing capital in the future, you can't ignore this. This is how the decisions in the future will be made. And if you want to be excluded or you want to be included, we're already seeing the trend of capital flowing towards more sustainable pieces. This is a piece of that journey. And I think that that's where it needs to bed in at the very, top levels of issuer management, but also before you're an issuer, start thinking about where it is you're looking at accessing capital in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I will throw in. I can't help myself. Emma, I think we need to understand that what we're trying to do here is to reduce transaction effort, to reduce the work for companies. We're trying to make it easier. We're trying to say, look, if you're doing this, you don't even need to know. I had a meeting today with a Ukrainian company that is going to be ripping out gas-fired boilers in central heating systems in Ukraine and putting in electric boilers. And I'm thinking, whoa, that is something we need. It's about a $1.5 billion pipeline that they're starting. During the war, they're starting. Now, they've got some credit issues. They have to get some political risk insurance from someone. But that's available now. But in terms of a green transition in a company, in an area like Europe, it's challenged to get off gas in a hurry for geopolitical as well as other reasons. It's a really cool. Now, all they need to know is that this particular approach qualifies. They can go to the taxonomy, they look it up, bingo, it's in there. Go ahead, get the green certificate, and they can then pitch to the investors who are out there, at least in the green bond market, way oversubscribing green stuff like double, triple, quadruple the subscription rates of vanilla bonds, because they've got a confirmation in their hand, independent review in this case, that the due diligence works for them, for like. And for companies, including SMEs, right? In a lot of areas in the EU taxonomy, for example, in the building sector, we've got a white list that is a list of individual either manufacturing or installation efforts which qualify. If you're a triple glazed window manufacturer in Europe, you qualify, folks. You don't need to do any proof except prove that you produce triple glazed windows. Bingo! It's as simple. That's stripping away of the requirements. And the need, which at the moment is dominated by having to hire a consultant to show how your emissions are better than your competitors or whatever, is meant to make it much easier for us to move money into the right kind of areas. And it's not abstract, because we've proven this works in the green bond market. It's why the green bond market is successful, because it's dominated by these kinds of methodologies. So it's easier. So it's not a matter of putting in a common methodology for calculating carbon benefits of new investments you make, which has added complexity, I think. Useful, important, but it's been a complex way of doing it. So it's actually about simplifying the list. There are data points you've got to meet. And yes, you do have to prove you don't employ 8-year-olds. But, in most parts of the world, that's regulation. So it's not a big deal. In the Congo, it's a problem. You actually have to do it. And a European investor that wants to invest in a cobalt mine, it's a reasonable thing to say they would like to know your company doesn't employ 8-year-olds, right? So if you like, that's what all these little data points that are doing. They deadly replicate stuff that in most economies is a regulatory requirement anyway. So it looks complicated, but in truth it makes it a damn sight easier. It's a bit like looking up legislation. Our economies in the West have grown on the back, not only on the back of fossil fuels, but on the back of the rule of law, of being able to have predictability. When you don't have predictability, when you can't know, when you've got to wait for the consultant's report to figure out to qualify, it's much harder. If you look up a rule set, look up the law, you can at least get enough to figure out how to act the next step. And that's what a taxonomy gives you. It makes life easier.
Yeah. We only have a couple of minutes left. So Sean, any final remarks? And then I'll go to Sherry and Elise.
I'll simply say, after the Biden summit, after Europe's 2030 announcements of emissions reductions, there is not an investor in the world that I've spoken to who doesn't believe that the shape of the future is decided. It will be clean green. The speed is an issue, and that's very material. If we don't get there fast enough, we blow all our wins. And knowing how to pick as the wave comes through, the tsunami that comes through our economy, what's going to work and what's not going to work is a real challenge. Taxonomy is a clue. If you're doing something in the taxonomy, if you report a proportion, you're at least the right track. And Swedish investors tell me if someone issues a bond and they haven't issued a green bond, first question, is this something we should know? Are you not in front of the curve? This is how this works. Find what you're doing that qualifies, tell the world about it. Run up the flag, shout from the rooftops, get a party going for the green stuff you're doing and alert the investors because they want to know. And eventually, everything will be taxonomy compliant, especially when we look at the resilience and adaptation measures that are coming through.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Sherry, final remarks from you?
Well, I'm looking forward to going to this green party, and hopefully all the rest of us will be there as well. I mean, I guess my final thoughts are about encouraging sort of the question about what data is going to be applicable, usable into all these frameworks. It should be a question that we ask each other, that we ask our regulators, we ask our policymakers. Because actually, I think there's a huge willingness to be able to, bed in on the most important data sets, but embedding that in that policy process and in that regulatory process, I think just makes it so much easier and so much simpler to comply. So that word "simple" hopefully can be pulled across.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elise, final points from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we demonstrated that taxonomies have a really crucial role to play. I mean, they are very important because of the transparency they provide. They are going to really create, more than a nudge effect for green investments. But if we want to really make like a big shift, we also need to include mandating companies and investors to develop and disclose transition plans. I think this is also like a critical aspect in the entire framework. And then there's also like, it's opening like another debate, something for another webinar, but real economy policies, a carbon price, like there are other policy tools which are also needed in addition to the taxonomy to really make that overall shift for sustainable activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Elise. Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you so much, Sean, for joining me this afternoon. A really, really great discussion. And hopefully we can continue. But yeah, thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thanks to our audience and our audience
Thank
questions.
you.